Welcome to the Hard Knocks MMA show, where every week we will go over the biggest stories in the mixed martial arts world, as well as exclusive information about Hard Knocks fighting. My name is Jeremy Ballantyne, and I will be guiding you through this week's MMA news. I'll also be throwing in my own personal opinions on some of the biggest stories out there. Agree or disagree with me, you can join in on the conversation by tweeting at HK Fighting, and next week I'll be responding to some of your tweets on the show. Let's start with the big news that broke yesterday. According to an interview with Ram Gilboa, Canada's George St Pierre is starting the process of getting back into competitive drug testing by the USADA. What this means is it is now an almost certainty that we will see GSP back in the UFC. As a vocal and high-profile advocate that drug testing needed to be changed, St Pierre said that the USDA has made some steps in the right direction. I think this move is predicated more by the UFC begging George to come back than it is St Pierre's desire to return, and I bet they backed up a Brinks truck to get him. Right now, other than Demetrius Johnson, none of the current men's champions have more than one title defense. Miocic isn't a draw. Cormier will always have John Jones hanging over his head. Bisping, well, we'll get to him later. Woodley just won his title, as did Eddie Alvarez, and neither of them are recognizable names outside the MMA world. The UFC needs a fighter not named Conor McGregor to be able to point the camera at, and St Pierre fits the bill. Speaking of McGregor, UFC 202 is next week, and I'll be giving my breakdown of that event, as well as my predictions for the main card on next week's show. On to the count. Michael Bisping will be fighting against Dan Henderson at UFC 204. When I heard this news, I was both happy and infuriated, as were most MMA fans. Let's start with the happy. I'm happy that Dan Henderson gets another shot at ending Bisping's night and his championship run with the nuclear weapons he has situated at the end of his arms. I am happy that the legend that Dan Henderson is has a chance to end his career with a belt around his waist. Now comes the other side. Bisping decides for his first title defense to take on a guy who is outside of his prime and outside of the top 10 in middleweight rankings. More fitting challengers like Jacare Souza and Yoel Romero are brushed aside. He's also going back on his word that he wanted Chris Weidman to be his first title defense. This is Michael Bisping's character to a T. He has several wins on his record that were benefited by fighting in England. There's nothing he can do about that, and for that I don't blame him. However, where his character comes into play is the post-fight interviews where he acts like he can't believe the fight was scored so closely. Go back and look at Bisping versus Matt Hamill if you don't believe me. The last point I'll make on what will surely be called a Michael Bisping hate fest is a recent interview on the MMA Hour with Ariel Helwani, where former champion Chris Weidman said he was embarrassed that Bisping was the champion of the division. I've never heard of that in any weight class. Unless you're living under a rock, you know that the Olympics are happening in Rio de Janeiro. On the wrestling side, there's two big storylines. The first one is at the 74 kilogram weight class men's division, where Olympic and world champion American Jordan Burroughs goes for his second straight gold medal. 74 kilograms is a feature weight class in wrestling and is said to be the true balance of technique, strength, and agility. That one is going to be extremely exciting. On the women's side, Japan's Saori Yoshida and Kaori Icho are attempting to make history to be the first athletes in the sport of wrestling with 4 Olympic gold medals. These ladies, none of them have lost at the Olympics. Here's a personal message for me as a Canadian. It goes out to the 8 wrestlers representing Canada at these Olympic Games. Kick some ass and bring home some hardware. The last bit of news for this week's show is to confirm some news that was first broken by James Lynch of Flow Combat and MMA Oddsbreaker yesterday, that Hard Knocks Fighting will indeed be having a tournament to crown the featherweight champion. The semifinals for the tournament will be held at HK 51 in October, and the finals will be held as one of the main events at HK 52 in December. The names of the competitors will be officially announced next week, and the draw will be announced live on Friday, August 19th on hardknocksfighting.com. Who do you want to see in the tournament? Tweet HK Fighting and let us know. Also, feel free to tweet in about anything I've said this week or what you'd like to see in next week's show. This has been this week's Hard Knocks MMA show. I'm Jeremy Ballantyne, and we'll see you next week.